Hi, this is Anne Marie, and this is the Anti-HR channel. And today I'm going to talk about why spending time trying to analyze why people do things in your workplace and honestly anywhere is a waste of time. And I'm going to talk about this in the context of Sean Combs, but again, I think it applies very much to workplace situations. But first, this is the Anti-HR channel, and on this channel, I talk about HR from an employee perspective. I discuss HR issues, provide HR tips to help employees understand their workplace rights and to assert those rights if they feel they are being violated. So if that is of interest to you, please hit that like button, please hit the subscribe button, and comment constructively. So I have been thinking a lot about why trying to understand people's motives when they do wrong things, and especially when they do especially harmful things, is what I call a fool's errand. And I say this because I've been seeing a narrative developing on social media and on the news, on talking heads on YouTube and news channels, etc., about the why Sean Combs engaged in the behavior that he is accused of in the indictment that came down last week. And reasons are being provided. Mr. Combs has been accused of human trafficking. He's been accused of SA, right, abusing individuals who worked for him, moving people across the state lines for illegal purposes, etc. And you can read the indictment. It's on the internet, not hard to find, right? Just Google Sean Combs criminal indictment. And, I was watching a podcast on YouTube the other day. It's called The Pivot. And there was a conversation with Steve Stout, I believe is his name. And he's a well-known music executive, marketing expert. He's been around for a long time. And he was asked a little bit about the case and, its impact on the quote culture and whether or not it's a black eye for the quote culture. And his response was to basically say that he felt that the reason that these things had happened, he blamed a lot of what Mr. Combs has been accused of on drug addiction. And he kept going back to the drug addiction. And then at one point he said, the most important thing here is, his kids. And that, he really feels bad about his children and that he believes that this is about drug addiction. And I beg to differ. Lots of people have drug addictions and they don't engage in predatory behavior. They don't exploit other people. Actually, usually the biggest victim of their addiction is themselves. They may engage in petty crimes like theft, usually fraud, to secure the money to continue to finance their addictions, but they don't hurt other people actively, right? And they don't engage in predatory behavior of the volume and type that Mr. Combs is accused of, right? And I think it's very dangerous to create this narrative that tries to correlate drug addiction with the crimes that Mr. Combs has been accused of as a way to explain or excuse or both, right? I think that's very problematic. And I think it's an extreme disservice to the many people who have been harmed, allegedly, by his actions. And frankly, I think it's an insult to drug addicts, drug addicts everywhere, to make this kind of correlation. But what also stood out to me was, there was a comment that Mr. Stout makes at one point when he's talking about this, where he talks about the fact that, Mr. Combs is being treated as Harvey Weinstein, the former, big wig in Hollywood producer and filmmaker, who was also found guilty of sex crimes. And I think he's awaiting retrial currently. They released him on a technicality from prison, but he is awaiting retrial in New York. And he also mentioned that Jeffrey Epstein, who was notoriously indicted for sex crimes in New York and then ultimately unalived himself, or so they say, allegedly. He unalived himself, which put all of that to rest in New York also. He also did not get bail. He was also not provided bail because he was considered to be a flight risk. Harvey Weinstein also was held without bail. And so he was kind of, almost seemed to be concerned at the fact that Mr. Combs was being treated the same. Mr. Combs has been denied bail twice, and the reasons provided primarily have been the concern by the court and the prosecutors, not only that he might be a flight risk, but that he will engage in pressuring potential witnesses and seeking to obstruct justice in that manner, and that he has a track record of intimidating witnesses, and therefore they think the best place for him is to keep him behind bars pending trial. And he seemed, he was saying, they're treating him like they treated these people. And I thought to myself, well, sometimes we all say we want equality as Black people. And maybe this is what equality looks like in this particular case, that he's not being treated better or worse in this situation than those notoriously problematic people were treated by the same system, right? And so, you can't say you want equality on one hand, but then when you're getting it, you speak of it as if it's a problem, right? And so I feel like it's very concerning to me that this argument is being put forth that we should blame this on drug addiction, and that there's a problem with the reality that this person is being treated by the system the way other high-profile people accused of similar crimes have been treated by the system. In fact, I think that's progress. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think it's very important for us to be careful to not try to excuse the behavior of people in high places when they do evil things, that sometimes maybe the reason somebody does something is simply because they're evil, and not because of drug addiction, and not because of something bad that happened to them when they were kids, or all these different things that we seek as a society to do when someone is wealthy, when someone is famous. We don't do it for the person that lives down the street. When the person that lives down the street does it, we conclude that they're evil and they belong behind bars and they need to be punished, especially if they're a person of color or a Black person, right? We want the book thrown at them if they're not famous. But when they are famous, there is a tendency to want to make excuses for them. And we as a society really need to move away from that tendency. If you have been in a workplace of any kind, at some point you've probably heard of or maybe personally experienced impropriety of some kind. And I have noticed often that there is a tendency for people to want to give, explanations and understand, why someone would do something or how did this happen. And, people do things for all kinds of reasons. And yes, bad things may have happened to them. They may have unhealthy habits. But at the end of the day, people do things that are wrong because they think they can get away with it often, because they have the power and the ability to do it, and because they don't have the moral compass necessary to not do the thing that they want to do. Not because of drugs, not because something bad happened in their childhood. Lots of people have bad things happen to them in their childhood, and they don't necessarily engage in this type of behavior. So I think it's a mistake to try to overanalyze why someone does something. I think it's more important, frankly, to demand accountability regardless of the reason. And we tend to live in a society where we deify people who have money, deify people who have power, and have a tendency to want to let them off the hook when they are found to have done wrong things, right? A lot of the things that the average person, famous, whether they're politicians or celebrities, when they do things that are a problem, we always want to spend a lot of time understanding why, and we often grapple as regular citizens with demanding and requiring accountability of them. And, I would submit that there's no way that Mr. Combs could have possibly gotten away with all the things that he's being accused in for the length of time that it is alleged that he engaged in this behavior if he did not have the power and the capacity to pay people, to intimidate people, to keep people quiet for all this time, right? And so I think that now that accountability is knocking on the doorstep, we don't know what that's going to ultimately look like, but he's at least going to have to answer for the things that he's been accused of. And then a jury of his peers will hopefully get to decide whether or not he's actually guilty of the things that he's been accused of. But I would rather that we spend more time, thinking about the victims here, who frankly, in my opinion, are the most important people, not his children with all due respect, but the people who are actually victims relevant to the allegations. Yes, his children are probably going to suffer as a result of his actions, but those are based on his choices. They may actually have to go out and get jobs like regular people, right? But those are a result of his actions. However, the things that he is accused of having done and victimizing other people who worked for him and were in personal relationships with him, he has to now be called for account for those things. And that's what should happen. And so I would urge those of us who are, paying attention to what's going on with this to think about that, right? And to not spend so much time trying to overanalyze why he did what he did, but instead to focus our minds on the impact of what he's alleged to have done, the long-term impact on those who have been victimized by it, and to put our sympathies there rather than spending time analyzing and, talking about drug addiction relevant to him and what's going to happen to his children. I think his children ultimately are going to have to live with this, the legacy of this for the rest of their lives. But I think they'll be okay. And if they're not, my sympathy is with them. However, the majority of my sympathy is with the people who are the victims, the alleged victims in his crimes. And so I think if we're going to put energy somewhere, that's where it should go. At least that's where my energy is going to go. So I just wanted to share these thoughts. These are going to be my last comments on this case. But I was really bothered when I watched that interview recently by the things that Mr. Stout said and how he deflected by not really answering the question he was asked in a lot of regards, but instead talking about drug addiction and blaming a lot of this on drug addiction. The other thing I will say is there's another question that was asked where they asked him, is this going to be a black eye on, quote, hip hop culture, unquote. And I just want to say, Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein were Jewish men, Jewish white men. And I don't think anyone will say because of what they did that Jewish white men have a higher propensity to be abusers than anybody else. And so I don't think that saying that because Sean Combs was a hip hop producer, a hip hop entertainer, that what he did has anything to do directly with hip hop or with black men as a group or community or black people as a group or community. Only someone ignorant would make that correlation. So he's responsible for what he did. This is not a black eye on anybody or any genre or community besides him. He's the person that this is a black eye on, right? So I think that even that thought pattern and that type of question is problematic in my view. We also cannot allow ourselves as a community to be pigeonholed or stereotyped on the basis of one person's actions or even actions of other people. Individual people who do evil things are responsible for what they do. And it's always a problem if you try to paint one group or community or race, etc., with a single brush. That's how we have gotten to some of the really problematic places we are as a society. And I think it's really problematic for us to engage in that kind of thinking when it comes to this. So in my opinion, the only black eye relevant to this is on him, right? I don't think this is something that has anything to do with hip hop, frankly. He used that as a vehicle to probably find victims and so on. But I don't think this means, that everybody that comes out of hip hop is going to engage in this kind of behavior. I think Hollywood as a community has a problem with engaging in abuse of people. People come into that, into entertainment usually very young. People who want to pursue careers in entertainment, whether it's music, acting, or behind the scenes, come into it very young. And there's a tendency among a sector of that community to engage in illegal behavior and to victimize young people at a time when they're vulnerable. They don't really understand the rules. They don't understand how things work, and people take advantage of them. And that's one of the pitfalls of that industry. So his behavior is not isolated. He is not the only one. I think a lot of people are very interested in seeing whether other people are going to be implicated ultimately. These parties that he was throwing that, was an open secret in the music industry, whether other people's names are going to be tarnished as a result of this situation. And that remains to be seen. And I think if anyone, if people are found to have been engaged in behavior that victimized others, they should be held to account for it. I don't care who they are. Even if it turns out to be people that I hold in high esteem and that I admire, then my feelings about them will change. But I think things that are done in the dark always come to light. And in this situation, other people are possibly going to be implicated. And that to me is the right outcome. I don't think that's a bad thing, right? But I don't think it puts a black eye on hip hop per se, but I think it does turn a lens on the entertainment industry as a whole, because there are problems there. There are problems in that industry, and they need to be rooted out. Harvey Weinstein is an example of it. This situation with Sean Combs is an example of it. And there are many stories throughout the history of that industry of this kind of behavior. It's not isolated. It's not unique, right? And so I do think that there's a problem there, and that problem needs to be addressed. But I think it's a mistake to say this is about hip hop per se. I think it's about the entertainment industry, right? And this is an industry that people work in as employees, and they get victimized and taken advantage of, right? And the issues that have been alleged against Mr. Combs aren't just about, human trafficking. It's also about wage theft, about not paying people for work that they have performed, for making people work, hours and hours and hours without sleep and rest, and then not even paying them for the number of hours that they worked and not paying them their royalties. They're like serious and significant labor issues that have come up that, people aren't talking about those because those aren't as interesting to them as the sex stuff, right? But there are other issues that have been alleged as well. He was known for not paying people on time, from what I understand, and often not paying people at all if he could get away with it. These are issues that have also floated around for a long time that people won't talk about. So, and these are serious matters, right? That someone works, they're supposed to be paid, right? Someone creates something, they're supposed to get credit for it, right? And, royalties are supposed to be paid for work. And sometimes he wasn't doing that. It is alleged, right? So there's serious issues relevant to labor rules and laws that also are alleged to have been broken in this matter. It's not just, the things in the criminal indictment that everyone is talking about, but there are also issues around his failure to pay people for work. If you look at the case that was filed, the most recent case that was filed against him that I talked about in my video before this one, I talked about the fact that she raised, lots of issues, but some of the issues that she raised was also around the fact that she felt that she was owed royalties and she was owed money for work that she had done that he had not paid her for. So there are a lot of issues here and that we can learn from, but I think it's really important for us to focus on what he is accused of doing and not spend a whole lot of time trying to analyze the why. I don't think any of us will ever really understand and know why he did what he did, besides the fact that he could do it and believed that he could get away with doing it because he was getting away with doing it for a very long time, allegedly. But in this particular situation and many situations like it, I think it's a mistake to focus on what is this about drug addiction? This is about drug addiction. And we should be sympathetic because he had a drug addiction. As I said, lots of people have drug addictions and they don't do this kind of thing. So let's not fall into that trap. Sometimes people are just evil. Sometimes people do things because they can and because they have the power to do it, right? And the drugs may amplify what they do, but it's not the reason for what they do. So I hope that this video has been helpful. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this in the comments. As I said, this will be my last video about this particular matter, but I felt this needed to be said, so I'm saying it. As always, I'm Anne Marie. This is the Anti-HR channel. HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend, but I am, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.